So, you think the fight for cannabis legalization is just a one-way street, right? A straight shot forward? Well, think again. It turns out, for every single step forward, there's a powerful, organized force pulling things right back. In 2026, the battle for cannabis is a full-blown tug of war. And honestly, the outcome is anything but certain. Let's try and unravel this really complex and contradictory story. To really get a handle on this national tug of war, we're going to zoom way in on a pretty surprising battleground, the state of Maine. What's happening there is basically a microcosm of the entire conflict, and it all kicks off with what sounds like a really innocent question. Okay, picture this. Someone walks up to you asking you to sign a petition for safer, cleaner cannabis. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, who wouldn't want that? As this petitioner in Maine puts it, you don't want to eat off dirty dishes. But what if that seemingly sensible argument was just a Trojan horse for something else entirely? And this is exactly where the plot thickens. Is the real goal here about consumer safety, or is it about a complete rollback of legalization? The answer to that question reveals a kind of hidden agenda that's playing out in states all across the country. You see, the battle in Maine is just one front in a nationwide war. From coast to coast, a fierce tug of war is raging between the forces pushing for legalization and those trying to repeal it. And in 2026, this conflict is really reaching a fever pitch. First, let's look at the side of the rope pulling for progress, that relentless push for legalization. This is the story that's dominated the headlines for years. And you know what? It's still gaining incredible momentum. This whole push for legalization is kind of like a two-pronged attack. On one side, you've got the recreational movement, which has already swept through nearly half the country. And on the other, there's the medical movement, which has made cannabis accessible to patients in the vast majority of states. Put them together, and they represent a huge, seismic shift in public policy. And what's really remarkable is just how widespread this movement is. We're talking from the sunny beaches of Florida all the way to the volcanic islands of Hawaii. The push for recreational cannabis is a truly national phenomenon. Even in places you might not expect, like Pennsylvania and Virginia, the tide is definitely turning. But it's not just about recreational use. Nope. In some of the most conservative corners of the country, there's a powerful movement fighting for medical cannabis. From Idaho to the Carolinas, you have patients and their families demanding access to a plant that could literally change their lives. And you know what? Even some of the most skeptical politicians are finally starting to listen. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So now, let's turn our attention to the other side of the rope, the organized and often pretty deceptive campaign to roll back legalization. This is where the story takes a dark and, frankly, unexpected turn. Remember that safer, cleaner cannabis petition back in Maine? Well, it turns out it was a total bait and switch. The initiative wouldn't just regulate the market, it would shut down the entire recreational system and even make it illegal for adults to grow their own plants. The tactic is so deceptive that a local Republican lawmaker, David Boyer, called it straight-up lying. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, Maine is not an isolated case. From Arizona to Massachusetts, a coordinated multi-state campaign is underway to completely dismantle legalization. And let's be clear, this isn't some grassroots movement. It's a well-funded and highly organized effort to turn back the clock on cannabis reform. But all these state-level battles are just one piece of the puzzle. Looming over everything is the long, long shadow of the federal government. And what happens in Washington, D.C. could be the ultimate game changer. Can you imagine this? You and your fellow citizens vote to legalize cannabis. But for over a decade, the federal government blocks you from actually doing it. That is the reality in Washington, D.C., where a tiny little provision in the federal budget has held the will of the people hostage. It's a really stark reminder of the federal government's power to just override local democracy. And this right here, this is the legislative weapon that's been used to keep D.C. in a state of cannabis limbo, Section 809 of the Appropriations Act. It's an incredibly powerful tool that just prohibits the use of federal funds to legalize any Schedule I substance. And for over a decade, it's been the roadblock to a legal market in the nation's capital. But what if the very foundation of this federal prohibition just crumbled? What if cannabis was no longer a Schedule I drug? The implications of that would be absolutely explosive. Look, this shift from Schedule I to Schedule 3 would be nothing short of a seismic event. I mean, just imagine cannabis going from being in the same federal category as heroin to being in the same class as things like ketamine or Tylenol with codeine. It would be a federal admission that, yes, cannabis has medical value, and that would change everything. So here we are. We have a nation basically at war with itself, a powerful push for legalization on one side, a determined campaign for repeal on the other, and this looming possibility of a federal game changer. The future of cannabis in America is really hanging in the balance, and 2026 could be the year the rope finally snaps. As Paul Armentano of Normal puts it, we are at a potential inflection point. The easy victories might be over. The cannabis reform movement is now facing some significant headwinds, and that forward momentum of the past decade is facing its greatest test yet. And here's the real irony in all of this. While all these politicians and lobbyists are waging war over cannabis, the American people, well, they've pretty much already made up their minds. Poll after poll shows a strong bipartisan majority in favor of legalization. It is a classic case of the people leading and the politicians lagging way behind. So as this tug of war for cannabis just rages on, the ultimate question remains: which side is going to prevail? Will the rope snap towards a future of greater access and freedom, or will the forces of restriction and repeal drag us all back into the past? The answer is completely up for grabs, and the fate of cannabis in America is hanging in the balance.